Jill Biden confronted Kennedy with a challenge to take an IQ test. And 36 hours later, he released a letter that left her reeling. Inside the Rayburn House office building in Washington, D.C., the air buzzed with the familiar intensity of a high-stakes policy forum. The type where national leaders assembled to debate ideas capable of shaping lives across the country. This particular session, streamed live to an attentive online audience, had been framed as a cooperative, bipartisan discussion centered on revising school funding formulas. Nothing sensational was expected, just practiced talking points, data-driven reasoning, and a few controlled exchanges to maintain interest. Staffers, journalists, and observers settled in, anticipating the usual fare. Charts on Title I allocations, arguments over equity versus excellence, and appeals for unity in education reform. Yet, as the second hour progressed, the tone shifted abruptly when First Lady Jill Biden, widely known for her composed advocacy on education issues, leaned toward her microphone. With a faint smirk signaling confidence, she delivered a remark that sent a chill through the room. Maybe we should both take an IQ test to settle this once and for all. It wasn't shouted or dripping with sarcasm. Its calm delivery made it sharper, aimed directly at Senator John Nye Kennedy of Louisiana, a firm Republican presence on the panel. Moderator Lynette Harmon, a veteran former PBS journalist respected for maintaining civility, blinked in surprise, momentarily forgetting her notes as the room tightened with tension. The faint rustle of a paper coffee cup being set down echoed from the back rows as the audience collectively held its breath. Kennedy, characteristically unruffled, showed no flash of indignation or haste. He merely tilted his head, fixed his gaze on Biden, and replied in his soft, deliberate Southern drawl. At your closing argument, the microphone caught every subtlety, transmitting his steady composure to viewers nationwide. Biden shrugged lightly, said it was just a thought, and turned back toward the moderator, clearly expecting a quick return to the agenda. But Kennedy did not let the challenge pass. Without a word, he leaned down with deliberate slowness, opened the front flap of his plain black briefcase, and from a narrow inner pocket removed a spotless white envelope, tightly sealed and unmarked except for the embossed gold seal of the Congressional Testing Initiative, CTI. Silently, he slid it across the polished table until it rested in the neutral space between them. A subdued gasp rose from the press section as Lynette froze, her eyes darting between the two as if witnessing a live wire snap. I asked them to keep it sealed, Kennedy said evenly, his voice carrying the folksy calm that resonated with his constituents, just in case. He leaned back, posture relaxed, eyes steady, no bravado, only the quiet confidence of someone prepared. In an instant, school budget discussions faded into the background as the envelope seized attention. Biden's expression flickered with uncertainty. She neither laughed nor immediately pushed back, instead studying the envelope as though it carried unexpected consequences. Lynette cleared her throat and recovered her composure. Senator Kennedy, are you suggesting that's your official IQ result from the CTI testing round last fall? Kennedy nodded once, firm and restrained. Yes. A murmur rippled through the crowd. A soft gasp from one corner, a nervous chuckle from another, as cameras snapped back into focus and the live stream's viewer count surged. Biden adjusted slightly in her seat, her smile returning without its earlier warmth, failing to reach her eyes. You're serious, she said. Dead serious, Kennedy replied, then turned to Lynette. You're welcome to open it if you'd like. In that moment, the panel shifted beyond policy into something decisive. No one brings sealed test results without foresight, without planning for the long game. Lynette glanced at the panel assistant, who looked to the staff attorney. Asterisk, a slight shake of the head followed, but Kennedy stepped in smoothly. Legally, I can authorize it now. This is my property. The envelope remained there at center stage as Lynette lifted it with the solemnity of a judge unsealing a verdict. Members of the audience leaned forward, phones raised to record the moment. while Biden, the influential First Lady, stayed silent, her posture shifting almost imperceptibly as if sensing momentum turning against her narrative. To understand how this envelope came to matter, one must look back to the preceding months when Biden and Kennedy, though operating within the same governmental framework, represented sharply contrasting approaches. Kennedy had long earned respect in congressional circles for pairing sharp intellect with plain-spoken delivery, refusing to soften his style to satisfy anyone. He spoke directly, challenged assumptions head-on, and expected equal rigor in response. Biden, with her established stature in education and public life, had noticed, as had her advisors, viewing his persistence as an obstacle to certain policy goals. The tension grew not through open insults, but through subtler exchanges in joint sessions. Biden occasionally redirected away from Kennedy's pointed questions, and in private briefings, interruptions hovered just short of impropriety. The breaking point came with Kennedy's education equity proposal, a carefully developed plan nearly a year in the making to recalibrate funding formulas that favored affluent districts. Biden opposed it, arguing it weakened high-performing schools. Their public clash reached its peak during a subcommittee hearing in Indianapolis, where Kennedy highlighted that schools in underprivileged areas were receiving nearly 30% less funding than nearby affluent ones. Biden interrupted twice, dismissing his request for uninterrupted time by saying, "I'm just helping clarify for the audience." The exchange went viral, magnified by Kennedy's composed silence as cameras captured the interruption before he replied, "Do I look like I need your help clarifying anything?" Overnight, it drew millions of views, turning their professional tension into a national storyline. Reporters framed it as ideological conflict, but at its core, it was substance versus spin. Kennedy armed with data, Biden with strategic redirection. Behind closed doors, murmurs in influential circles labeled Kennedy's ideas reckless or emotionally driven, prompting him to act preemptively. Few knew he had enrolled in the CTI, a voluntary assessment designed for leaders to measure cognitive agility, stress-based problem-solving, and executive function. He completed it anonymously at a testing center near Baton Rouge, telling only his chief of staff, describing it as protection against inevitable doubts about his competence. He never expected to reveal it, keeping the sealed results as a quiet, personal safeguard. Then Biden's on-camera provocation during a unity-focused panel forced it into view, shifting the balance decisively. Kennedy's upbringing in Zachary, Louisiana, shaped his resilience amid modest means. Homes scented with homemade meals, parents balancing teaching and farming, instilling independence early. He learned self-reliance, stretching limited resources, attacking schoolwork with intensity, excelling in puzzles, debates, and history despite distractions. A formative teacher once gave him a book on leadership, urging him never to diminish himself. A lesson he carried through college, law studies at Virginia and Oxford, and early public service roles that sharpened his skills under pressure and built his reputation for precision and resolve. His path into politics grew from grassroots demands for genuine representation, narrow electoral victories, and a commitment to bringing grounded seriousness to Washington, where substance mattered more than spectacle. The envelope was never about ego. It was protection against narratives that questioned qualification. And now, pushed by Biden, the moment had arrived. As the commercial break ended, room 2.1141 throbbed with a distinctly altered energy. The panel's original focus on funding reform was now completely eclipsed. Kennedy had come armed with spreadsheets from Louisiana districts, detailed case studies, and thick research binders, while Biden arrived intent on steering the conversation. Lynette pulled it back. "Let's talk solutions. If the model is broken, what's the fix?" Kennedy outlined a framework balancing local tax revenue with need-based federal aid, similar to models used in Texas. Biden cut in, saying that approach assumes government knows better than families. Kennedy answered evenly. No. It ensures a rural Louisiana first grader isn't valued less than one in suburban New Jersey. Murmurs rippled through the room. Biden pushed again. Your proposals sound like wish lists driven by emotion instead of data. Maybe that IQ test idea. And then it happened. Kennedy set the envelope on the table. Silence followed. Lynette confirmed and opened it. 98th percentile in analytical reasoning, 97th in spatial logic, 95th in executive processing, top 2% overall. There was no applause. The weight of the moment lingered. Kennedy stayed composed. Biden hesitated. She responded that such results weren't meant to be public unless requested. He replied simply. Recess was called, but the shift was unmistakable. Biden's jab had rebounded, underscoring Kennedy's preparation. Viewership surged past 1.2 million as clips went viral. During the break, Biden's team strategized pivots while Kennedy's readiness stood affirmed. When the panel resumed, Biden acknowledged the value of transparency, but pointed out the limits of IQ. Kennedy agreed, adding that questioning qualifications publicly requires doing one's homework. I walk through open doors with receipts. The room released a collective breath. The hierarchy cracked. Kennedy's calm had flipped the script, a quiet testament to leadership. The letter's impact echoed as reporters buzzed, polls formed, and the silence between them thickened. Kennedy leaned back. Biden tapped her fingers. This was no longer just a debate. It was a reckoning, the envelope symbolizing an unyielding intellect. Its echoes continued through the Rayburn House office building long after recess ended. Yet to fully understand how Senator John Nye, Kennedy transformed what could have been a dismissive jab into a powerful display of readiness and leadership. One must look deeper into the roots of their professional rivalry. A clash born not of personal animus, but of fundamentally different philosophies on how best to serve America's students through education policy. At its heart lay opposing visions. First Lady Jill Biden, drawing on her long career as an educator and advocate, consistently supported broad federal initiatives aimed at advancing equity through centralized funding, standardized curriculum reforms, and integrated support systems designed to address wider social inequalities within schools. She argued forcefully that education was a holistic endeavor, one where government intervention could level the playing field by directing resources to underserved communities, so no child was disadvantaged by geography or circumstance. Kennedy, by contrast, approached the issue from a firmly conservative stance grounded in limited government, fiscal restraint, and local control, believing that meaningful reform rose from states and communities rather than being imposed from above. His arguments leaned on practical experience, citing real-world examples from Louisiana's varied terrain, from busy cities to quiet rural towns, where he had seen how heavy federal strings could suppress innovation and burden taxpayers without delivering lasting gains. Instead of sweeping mandates, Kennedy pushed targeted incentives such as school choice vouchers, merit-based teacher pay, and simplified funding formulas tied to performance and accountability, often explaining complex economics through vivid folk metaphors, likening bloated bureaucracy to bailing water from a sinking boat with a teaspoon while ignoring the hole in the hull. This approach was more than rhetorical flair. It functioned as a deliberate way to connect with everyday Americans who felt alienated by Washington's jargon-heavy debates, enabling Kennedy to bridge the divide between policy experts and parents anxious about their children's futures. Their differences had been simmering across multiple forums leading up to the panel, beginning with a string of subcommittee hearings where Biden advocated amendments to existing laws that would link school funding more tightly to diversity and inclusion benchmarks, stressing culturally responsive teaching and environmental factors in school infrastructure. Kennedy, ever watchful of conservative principles, countered by warning of unintended consequences. arguing such measures could add new layers of bureaucracy that siphoned money away from classrooms and toward compliant staff. In one especially pointed exchange during a hearing on federal grant distribution, he carefully presented data showing that states with greater autonomy over education spending, including those experimenting with public-private partnerships, posted higher graduation rates and stronger test scores without exploding budgets. "It's like planting a garden," he would say in his steady drawl. "You don't just scatter seeds and hope. You prepare the soil, pick the right places, and let locals water it with their own rain." The analogy reinforced his belief in decentralized decision-making and showcased his ability to translate conservative economics into relatable language, earning applause from colleagues who appreciated his direct defense of taxpayer interests. Biden's replies frequently returned to the moral necessity of national standards to confront systemic bias. But Kennedy's answers never wavered, consistently grounded in empirical data from conservative think tanks and state reports, refusing to let emotion eclipse evidence. The rivalry intensified behind closed doors, where Kennedy's preparation stood out most clearly. He arrived armed not merely with opinions, but with exhaustive dossiers, including long-term cost projections of proposed reforms and case studies from conservative successes in states like Florida and Texas, where voucher programs had expanded access for low-income families. His chief of staff later recalled nights spent watching Kennedy pore over these materials, cross-checking figures and anticipating every argument, embodying the conservative ideals of self-reliance and thoroughness that defined his career. During one such briefing on equity proposals, Biden suggested his ideas were too narrow, focused more on cutting costs than comprehensive uplift, prompting Kennedy to respond gently but firmly that saving $1 today means educating to children tomorrow, a line capturing his commitment to sustainable, responsible governance. These encounters were not explosive confrontations, but measured sparring, with Kennedy's calm persistence often leaving a strong impression on observers, who noted how he avoided grandstanding in favor of careful analysis, making him a formidable advocate for limited government solutions. As tensions grew, Kennedy anticipated that disputes could drift from policy disagreements into questions of competence, particularly in a climate where conservative views were sometimes dismissed as outdated or simplistic. That foresight drove him to enroll in the Congressional Testing Initiative, a voluntary program assessing leadership-critical cognitive skills like analytical reasoning and executive processing, viewing it as a logical extension of his preparation, much like studying briefs before a major vote. He approached the assessment with the same discipline he applied elsewhere, completing it quietly at a center outside Baton Rouge and confiding only in a trusted aide, explaining that he wanted tangible proof of mental acuity should critics move from challenging ideas to questioning intellect. This step was not about ego or preemptive display. It aligned with his belief in personal responsibility and readiness, ensuring he could defend not only his policies but his capacity to design them. In the lead-up to the education panel, Kennedy's team ran mock sessions to test responses and sharpen arguments as he reviewed funding algorithms and equity studies, consistently framing his positions around empowering families and educators at the local level rather than expanding federal control. Biden, meanwhile, appeared ready to spotlight progressive advances, perhaps underestimating how Kennedy's mix of intellectual rigor and accessible rhetoric had earned him strong support among those weary of Washington overreach. Their earlier clashes had established a pattern, with Biden advancing expansive, inclusive reforms. Kennedy consistently answered with pragmatic conservative safeguards that emphasized efficiency and choice. In one joint task force meeting on curriculum standards, he cited international comparisons to argue against rigid nationwide mandates, pointing out that countries with more flexible systems routinely outperformed those bound by uniform rules, quipping that you don't win a race by tying everyone's shoes together. The remark reinforced his support for state sovereignty while highlighting a global outlook. Shaped by years of studying education models driven by free market incentives, this buildup created a quiet anticipation ahead of the panel, where observers expected sharp policy clashes, though few foresaw the personal turn that followed. Kennedy's choice to carry the sealed CTI results grew directly from these experiences, serving as a quiet assurance that if debate drifted toward questioning competence, he could respond with undeniable proof while preserving the dignity of his office and reflecting the conservative principle of preparedness. As the panel resumed after recess, the roots of the rivalry influenced every exchange, with Kennedy's steady presence repeatedly steering discussion back to essentials like fiscal accountability, his metaphors and data weaving a narrative of measured leadership that resonated beyond the room. The envelope moment was not isolated, but the culmination of months of principled positioning, where Kennedy's adherence to conservative values, fiscal discipline, local control, and intellectual honesty framed him not as reactive, but as a steady force ready to illuminate facts when doubt surfaced. That foundation explained his composure and hinted at wider consequences as reactions poured in nationwide, signaling a shift in how such debates were viewed. When the session in the Rayburn House Office Building formally concluded, the real impact of Senator John Nye, Kennedy's composed reveal began unfolding like a wave extending far beyond room 2141. As what started as a routine discussion of school funding formulas became a viral moment that captivated the country and sparked admiration for his unflappable demeanor and strategic foresight. In the immediate aftermath, as Lynette Harmon thanked the panelists and the live stream faded, the room did not erupt, but simmered with energy. Staffers exchanging wide-eyed looks, journalists typing furiously, and audience members replaying clips already spreading across social feeds. Viewership, which had surged past 2 million at its peak, held firm, igniting a digital storm as excerpts circulated with hashtags like #KennedyPrepared and #EnvelopeOfTruth, trending within minutes and drawing praise from commentators who called his handling a masterclass in humility and intellect. Under pressure, conservative media highlighted his calm as an embodiment of Republican values: preparation, resilience, and facts over theatrics, while even neutral observers noted his ability to redirect the focus back to policy without triumphalism, reinforcing his image as a thoughtful leader devoted to Louisiana's families. On X, formerly Twitter, the clip amassed millions of views within hours, with users posting reactions praising his quiet strength, sharp mind, and the envelope moment as pure class. No spectacle, just evidence, reflecting a groundswell of approval that crossed party lines as viewers appreciated how he turned a potential provocation into a reaffirmation of substance over personal attacks. Media pundits across cable news devoted primetime segments to dissecting the exchange, with one major network anchor remarking that Senator Kennedy hadn't merely defended himself but elevated the entire discussion, reminding viewers that true intelligence reveals itself through actions rather than accusations. While online forums buzzed with detailed breakdowns of his body language, how he stayed seated, calm, hands folded, eyes steady, embodying a conservative ideal of composure under pressure. Back in the room, as attendees filtered out, Kennedy avoided handshakes and interviews, instead gathering his notes with the same deliberate care he applied to everything, offering a brief nod to his team before moving down a side corridor where his chief of staff handed him a bottle of water and murmured that it was textbook, that he had kept it focused on the issues. Kennedy's reply was characteristically restrained, a slight smile and a quiet remark that people deserved better than distractions, urging a return to fixing funding gaps and refocusing on education reforms he had long championed, such as strengthening local control and accountability measures to help underserved schools without unnecessary federal expansion. That humility only intensified the positive response pouring in, with educators from Louisiana emailing messages of gratitude. One teacher writing that watching his composure inspired her students and sparked a classroom discussion about preparation and grace under pressure, while parents in rural districts shared stories online about how his advocacy had already benefited their communities through targeted voucher programs. The clip's reach extended into unexpected spaces, as late-night shows ran light-hearted spoofs portraying Kennedy as an unflappable figure, complete with animated envelopes flattening debates, yet always framed to highlight wit and wisdom rather than ridicule. Conservative radio hosts dedicated entire segments to the moment, praising how his top-tier CTI scores validated his reputation as a sharp analyst of policy details, from budget structures to equity reviews, reinforcing why constituents trusted him to push for efficient, effective governance. As the evening progressed, the White House communications team scrambled internally, fielding press inquiries as headlines began framing the story around Kennedy's moment, with phrases like Kennedy's sealed secret steals. The show dominating aggregators and coinciding with a spike in donations to education-focused conservative organizations. Kennedy himself, however, sidestepped the spotlight, declining immediate interview requests to review panel feedback in his office, integrating suggestions into ongoing proposals for need-based supplements that balanced local taxation with federal assistance modeled on successful conservative systems. This emphasis on substance over spectacle earned further admiration, with a viral Reddit thread collecting thousands of upvotes for comments noting that Kennedy didn't boast. He simply proved his point and moved on, calling it the kind of leadership the country needed. Influencers with large followings shared compilations of his past hearings, highlighting his consistent use of logical breakdowns and plain metaphors in advocating taxpayer-friendly reforms, while the effects rippled through professional circles as fellow senators sent private notes of support. One colleague praising the poise of a true statesman who kept attention on children's futures. Media analyses multiplied, emphasizing that Kennedy's response not only neutralized the challenge but humanized a harsh political arena, portraying him as a figure of integrity who placed service above self-promotion. On platforms like YouTube, reaction videos surged, with creators from varied backgrounds applauding his preparation as inspiring. One popular channel noting that in an era of soundbites, Kennedy arrived with receipts and without ego, a message that resonated with young viewers aspiring to leadership roles. And the transmission of that moment did not stop at national borders. International outlets soon picked up the story, framing it as a piece of American political theater where intellect ultimately prevailed, further polishing Kennedy's image as a global symbol of conservative prudence. Back in Louisiana, local news stations looped the clip while interviewing residents who voiced pride in their senator's representation, including one Baton Rouge voter who said he had always been about facts and fairness, and that the envelope merely showed the world what they already knew. Kennedy's office experienced a surge in constituent calls, not with complaints, but with encouragement to continue pushing reforms, particularly those emphasizing executive processing and funding decisions that reflected the skills he had displayed. As night settled in, the senator ended his day not in celebration, but by drafting emails to fellow panelists, proposing bipartisan refinements to his framework and keeping the dialogue open and constructive. That approach fueled further positive online commentary, with polls emerging that showed rising trust in Kennedy's handling of education issues, voters appreciating his blend of analytical strength and approachable style. While reactions were not unanimous, the dominant sentiment leaned toward admiration for how he preserved decorum and transformed a tense exchange into a teachable moment about preparedness and respect in public service. Conservative think tanks released statements applauding his defense of merit and readiness, tying it to broader themes of individual empowerment over government overreach. as social media algorithms continued amplifying the content to millions more viewers. Ultimately, the immediate fallout extended beyond the envelope itself, reaffirming Kennedy's image as a committed public servant whose actions spoke louder than any test score and inspiring renewed discussion about what authentic leadership looks like in a polarized era, as clips circulated in the days that followed. The narrative solidified that Kennedy had not only endured the moment, but navigated it with grace, keeping attention fixed on policy progress and earning praise for exemplary conduct. The dust eventually settled on the viral whirlwind sparked by Senator John Nye Kennedy's envelope moment at the Rayburn panel. Yet its reverberations continued shaping political discourse and broader conversations about leadership, preparation, and understated resilience long after headlines faded and late-night shows moved on. What began as a brief challenge from First Lady Jill Biden, met with Kennedy's calm unveiling of his congressional testing initiative results, evolved into something far larger, a cultural reference point that encouraged teachers, students, professionals, and everyday Americans to reflect on readiness in the face of doubt, leadership grounded in humility rather than ego, and the importance of substance over spectacle in a soundbite-driven world. The moment was not merely about ranking in the top 2% for analytical reasoning, spatial logic, and executive processing, but about a deeper truth, with Kennedy embodying a conservative ethos of self-reliance, preparation, and quiet strength that resonated across diverse audiences. From rural Louisiana classrooms to urban community centers, sparking conversations on meeting challenges with conviction and grace. The long-term impact unfolded in both measurable and intangible ways, becoming a symbol of turning adversity into opportunity, not through loud retaliation, but through steady, deliberate presentation of facts, offering a leadership lesson that reached far beyond Washington, D.C., in the weeks and months after the panel. The narrative around Kennedy hardened into one of principled leadership, as platforms like X sustained engagement with users sharing envelope clips, alongside captions praising calm under pressure and facts over feelings. Conservative commentators highlighted how his response aligned with core Republican values such as accountability, preparation for scrutiny, and service over personal glory, while prominent radio hosts dissected the exchange, arguing that conservatives prevail by doing the work rather than shouting the loudest. Admiration also crossed partisan lines, with moderate and progressive voices acknowledging his composure, including an education blogger who wrote that regardless of policy disagreements, Kennedy's readiness and restraint offered a lesson for anyone in public life, underscoring a broader takeaway about respect and discipline in leadership. True leadership, many concluded, transcends party lines, resonating with anyone who values competence and composure under pressure. Schools began incorporating the story into curricula, especially in civics and leadership classes, where teachers used it to spark conversations about preparation and resilience. A middle school in Baton Rouge even launched a Ready Like Kennedy program, urging students to prepare thoroughly for presentations and debates and stressing that confidence grows from effort, not bravado. One student's essay, later shared by a local news outlet, captured the mood. Senator Kennedy didn't yell or get angry. He just showed up prepared, and that made me want to study harder for my next test. The broader social impact became evident as the moment prompted people to reflect on times they themselves had been underestimated. In workplaces, community groups, and family discussions, individuals shared experiences of being doubted because of background, style, or ideas, and how Kennedy's example encouraged them to respond with proof of capability rather than emotional reaction. A young professional in New Orleans posted a widely viewed YouTube video describing how she had been overlooked in a corporate meeting, but inspired by Kennedy, prepared a detailed report that silenced critics and earned her a promotion. He showed me you don't have to be the loudest in the room, just the most prepared, she said, echoing a sentiment that quickly spread. The ripple extended to online forums, where threads titled, "What's Your Envelope?" invited users to share moments when preparation paid off, despite skepticism. From nailing difficult job interviews to securing community grants with carefully built proposals. These stories underscored a universal truth. Everyone carries an envelope of their own. Whether a credential, a skill, or a quiet resilience shaped by hardship. And Kennedy's moment gave people permission to present it with confidence. In education circles, the incident sparked deeper discussion about recognizing varied forms of intelligence. Kennedy's CTI results were not just statistics. They challenged assumptions that a folksy Southern drawl or conservative posture signaled lesser sophistication. That message resonated strongly in communities often stereotyped, particularly rural areas, where many felt affirmed seeing someone like them meet a high-profile challenge without abandoning authenticity. A community college instructor in Shreveport used the clip in a seminar, asking students to examine how Kennedy's plain-spoken yet precise delivery confronted biases, linking intelligence to polished presentation instead of substance, prompting lively debate. The takeaway was unmistakable. Intelligence appears in many forms, and dismissing it based on style leads to misjudgment. This discussion aligned naturally with Kennedy's broader push for education policies empowering local communities, reinforcing his belief that diverse needs are best addressed through tailored, state-led solutions rather than uniform federal mandates. His office received letters from educators nationwide, including one from a rural Arkansas teacher who wrote that his example showed students they did not have to change who they were to prove their worth. The moment also stirred reflection in political circles, with young staffers sharing the clip and discussing the corrosive tone of modern discourse while praising Kennedy's calm, fact-driven approach. A Capitol Hill intern wrote that he didn't take the bait, he took the high road, and that more of that was needed. Analysts across the spectrum described it as a call for substance over spectacle. And even critics acknowledged the effectiveness of his strategy. Asterisk facts, not insults, define the moment's impact. Kennedy personally avoided the spotlight, declining interviews and instead returning his focus to advancing his education equity proposal. That restraint earned bipartisan respect, with one senator remarking, "He's back at the desk, grinding, a quality many called rare." Back in Louisiana, constituents flooded his office with messages of support, and town halls began citing his conduct as a model of research-driven leadership. The influence soon extended beyond politics. Asterisk, motivated by Kennedy's composure. Schools introduced envelope challenges that taught students to prepare thoroughly and present with confidence. The idea carried into workplaces as well, reinforcing the belief that preparation is power. Kennedy's legacy evolved into a lesson on self-worth built through diligence and dignity, offering guidance for parents, professionals, and aspiring leaders. In the end, Kennedy did not pursue fame. Asterisk, he redirected it to inspire others. The envelope was more than a prop, symbolizing readiness, quiet resolve, and a lifetime of preparation. His story urges everyone to carry their own envelope skills, knowledge, confidence, to lead with purpose rather than ego. By doing so, a culture emerges where merit speaks louder than noise.